Chris, did you know that December belongs to Cthulhu?
What?
That's right. If you go over to Tor.com, you will see that they have devoted the entire month to everyone's favorite cosmic tentacled thing that should not be.
Oh, yeah, I knew that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. No, I've been over to Tor.com.
Yeah.
They got awesome stuff. They have stuff from editors, scholars, and fans like us.
Yeah, they're just contributing stories and articles and analyses and comics and artwork.
Yeah, a lot of cool artwork over there. I definitely recommend. They have a whole thread that's just a bunch of different art that they keep adding stuff to, and it's all awesome.
Of course, if you want to purchase some of that artwork over at Tor.com, you can do that as well.
You can, and all of the books that they carry, H.P. Lovecraft specifically, 30% off.
30% off. They've got annotated versions of his stories. Yep. They've got analysis.
Books that I use in the show.
Right. They've got original fiction from the Lovecraft Circle that you can purchase over there.
Absolutely.
Great stuff. Of course, we mention this because this podcast that you're listening to right now will be part of that month of Cthulhu over at Tor.com. And in this episode, we are going to be covering the legendary story by Lovecraft, Herbert West, Reanimator.
And this is going to be the first of 2 parts.
That's right. We have a special guest this week who we'll be talking to in a moment, but wanted to tell everybody that our reader is the incomparable Andrew Lehman. So without further ado, folks, welcome to the show.
I am Chris Lackey.
I'm Chad Pfeiffer.
And this is the H.P. Lovecraft Literary Podcast.
Brought to you by Tor.com.
hppodcraft.com.
Okay.
Of Herbert West, who was my friend in college and in afterlife, I can speak only with extreme terror.
That's a curious opening line.
Yeah, it is kind of strange.
Could you tell me about Herbert West? Oh, I can only speak of him with extreme terror. Are you ready?
Well, the question is, who is this guy?
Yes, exactly.
Wait, who's this guy?
Yeah, who's that guy that just spoke there?
Who's this guy? Oh, I believe we have a guest host this week.
What do you know?
This is Stuart Gordon.
Hello.
Welcome, Stuart. Most of you will know him as director of the film version of the story we're covering today.
Yes.
Herbert West, Reanimator.
But, this guy, I guess, is, Herbert West's assistant.
Yes, the protagonist.
Who remains nameless
right
throughout the entire...
Never give a name.
But this character became very important to us when we did the movie.
Oh, right.
Because what we realized was that we needed someone who was essentially a normal person that the audience could kind of relate to, sort of someone who would be asking the kinds of questions that they might want to ask.
Right.
And we called him Dan Kane, and he was played by Bruce Abbott in the film. And I've always felt that his role was the most difficult one of all.
Sure.
Because even though Jeffrey Combs got all the attention
right.
playing Herbert West, it was really Bruce Abbott who is the character that the audience identifies with and the one that goes through all the changes in the story.
Yeah, it's really his story. I mean, Herbert West is a big force in that story, but it's about this guy and it's kind of his temptation into darkness.
Right, exactly,
yeah.
and his reactions to it all. And he leads us through it.
Yeah, on the car on the way over here, we're recording at Stuart's office in Burbank. We're talking about here. This guy knew that Herbert was murdering people essentially, and he still went off to war with him. He's that easily cowed into submission.
He's a very similar character to Randolph Carter in
the Statement of Randolph Carter.
He's
an assistant to Harley Warren in that story.
Right, and he kind of does whatever Warren wants him to do.
Well, on that terror that he must speak of Herbert West with, he says,
"This terror is not due altogether to the sinister manner of his recent disappearance, but was engendered by the whole nature of his life work, and first gained its acute form more than 17 years ago when we were in the 3rd year of our course at the Miskatonic University Medical School in Arkham. While he was with me, the wonder and diabolism of his experiments fascinated me utterly, and I was his closest companion. Now that he is gone and the spell is broken, the actual fear is greater. Memories and possibilities are ever more hideous than realities. The first horrible incident of our acquaintance was the greatest shock I ever experienced, and it is only with reluctance that I repeat it."
And this incident that he's speaking of makes up the first chapter of the story.
From the Dark.
Yes.
And this was written as a serial for a magazine called Home Brew.
Home Brew, which is a comedy magazine, I believe, which is kind of strange.
Well, Lovecraft thought of this as a comedic piece, actually.
Yeah.
And he was very dismissive of it because he was actually paid to write it.
Right. I think it was $5 in addition.
It might have been his first... Oh, shoot.
His first
paid gig. I think it was his first paid gig.
It was his first paid gig, yeah.
And he was one of these guys who believed that what you wrote for yourself that was true art.
Right.
But if you were actually paid to write something, then it was
right.
You were being a whore essentially.
Although from some of his letters, he talks about what a whore he is, and you could tell he kind of likes it. You know what I mean? Well, he's kind of bragging that he's got the paid job as he's complaining about what hack work it is.
Yeah, he's like, oh, this terrible hack work, which I get paid $5 a page for.
But this story was out of print for a long, long time because Lovecraft and Lovecraft's group kind of looked down on it. They thought it was sort of trash. August Derleth and those guys, who was the one who was responsible for publishing Lovecraft's work after Lovecraft died. Yeah. And so Herbert West Reanimator was left out. And when I first heard about the story, it was I had read a lot of Lovecraft and I never had read this story. I never had encountered it. And we were talking about the fact that everyone was making vampire movies very much like today.
Oh,
sure.
And I was getting kind of tired of them, and I said, I wish someone would make a Frankenstein movie. And they said, well, someone should make a movie out of Herbert West Reanimator by Lovecraft, and I had never heard of it. So I was intrigued, and I started looking around and couldn't find it anywhere. And I finally went to I was living in Chicago, so I went to the Chicago Public Library, and it turned out they had a copy of it in their special collections.
Oh, nice!
Yeah.
But I had
to do some research.
What I did was I had to fill out a card and request it,
right? Mm-hmm.
And then they had to go back into their sort of tombs and dig it out. And I got a postcard from them 6 months later saying you can come to the library.
6 months later?
6 months.
Whoa!
Yeah. You can come here and read it in the library, but we're not going to let you.
And that was the only
take it
copy
out.
that you could find.
Yeah, and then what they gave me was I don't know if it was I don't think it was actually a copy of Homebrew, but it was a pulp printing, and the pages were so old and that they were literally crumbling in my hands as I was turning the pages.
That's so
and
cool.
So I asked the librarian if it would be all right to Xerox it, and she let me. And so I took the Xerox pages home with me, and it's only about 30 pages long.
Right.
I think each chapter is about 5 pages or something like that.
And when in each chapter, because it was a serial, somewhat summarizes the story to date. So
right,
actually,
as you remember in our last episode.
Exactly. Yeah. Now this story is the first. It's not the first mention of Miskatonic, but this is the first Miskatonic University usage as a facility.
Because Picture in the House was the first time that he talks about Arkham and Miskatonic Valley. So
right.
But this might be the first time he talks about Miskatonic Medical School.
It definitely is the first time he talks about Miskatonic Medical School. And in this first chapter,
From the Dark,
our protagonist, unnamed, lays out the basic premise of the story, which is that Herbert West has an obsession. He believes that death can be overcome artificially.
Right.
He doesn't think that life is a sacred thing or that we have souls.
No, he says it's a chemical process.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's mechanical. He says the body and how it works is a mechanical thing, and if you can understand those mechanics, then you can understand the secrets of life.
What's interesting is that this predates, the idea of adrenaline and so forth.
Right.
Using, now we sort of take it for granted that when someone's heart stops, we can start it up again.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But in those days, if your heart stopped, that was it.
Yeah. There was no CPR. There was no.
There were no little shocks, like defibrillation paddles or anything.
Right.
So this really is, what he's onto is absolutely true to some degree.
It certainly is. Yeah.
Although what he's talking about, I think, in the story is the idea of reactivating the brain.
Yes, which unfortunately isn't possible at current technology.
Thus far.
Although I just was sent an article that's about a guy who was doing something almost the same thing, really, which is they've been able to bring people back who have been dead for hours now. It involves hooking their bodies up to a heart-lung machine and keeping the body going.
Oh, right, I see.
And then fixing it,
right.
and then bringing the person, zapping them and bringing starting their heart up again, and then taking them off the machine.
Artificial respiration and a heart pump of some kind that keeps the blood flowing and keeping oxygen in the blood.
They've also found that if someone freezes to death, if they fall into like an icy lake or something, that the time can be extended sometimes to as long as an hour.
Right, yeah.
And the most famous doctor in the country right now, Sanjay Gupta, no kidding, is a reanimator as well, because he just wrote a book that he's been hawking called Cheating Death.
Oh, really?
He's been going on the circuit to talk about it. And I saw him in an interview on, I think it was a Colbert Report, where they started talking about zombies because he was saying the point at which somebody dies is open to interpretation. The doctor declares it, but he's declaring that the person is dead. It doesn't mean they're really dead. Gupta's saying the same thing that Herbert West was saying.
Well, what when I was working on the movie, we did talk to a lot of doctors and scientists, and their attitude was exactly the same as West's, which is, and there is research that's being done about being able to reactivate the brain. So the sort of experiments that West is doing in this are things that are actually being done these days.
Yeah. Right. Well, he's got two major problems in his experiments. The first of which is that the solution is different for every life form that he does. So he's been working on animals.
Right. Yeah, he tries it on vermin, rats, and guinea pigs and things like that.
But if he ever wants it to be successful on humans...
Dogs.
Yeah, cats and dogs.
He's got to use human subjects.
Well, it's also, I think, what he's trying to do is to show that the person is conscious, that there is and that is understanding, and responding, which is hard to do with an animal. It's kind of
true.
Maybe the thing is moving around, but is it really, is its mind working correctly?
Right. And that brings us to our second problem, which is that the human corpses that he wants to test on have to be exceedingly fresh.
And that's really, I think, is the joke, which is why I think this is. Lovecraft thought of this as a comedy, which is every time West's experiments go terribly wrong,
right.
he always says, "Well, he just wasn't fresh enough."
Yeah. Exactly. But see, this is also what kind of leads the skeptical doctors at the university to disbelieve him, because if a patient dies and he reanimates them, they'll say, "Well, he was just never dead."
Right.
This doesn't work. And chief among his skeptics and detractors is Dr. Halsey, who's the
dean of
the medical school. And he doesn't want Herbert screwing around with this stuff.
No.
And he won't commit university resources to help him.
Basically, Herbert and our narrator get the idea that they're going to set up their own little lab, and they find this abandoned farmhouse.
It says,
It was not long after the faculty had interdicted his work that West confided to me his resolution to get fresh human bodies in some manner, and continue in secret the experiments he could no longer perform openly. West was then a small, slender, spectacled youth with delicate features, yellow hair, pale blue eyes, and a soft voice. And it was uncanny to hear him dwelling on the relative merits of Christchurch Cemetery and the Potter's Field. We finally decided on the Potter's Field because practically every body in Christchurch was embalmed, a thing, of course, ruinous to West's researches. I was, by this time, his active and enthralled assistant, and helped him make all his decisions, not only concerning the source of bodies, but concerning a suitable place for our loathsome work. It was I who thought of the deserted Chapman farmhouse beyond Meadow Hill, where we fitted up on the ground floor an operating room and a laboratory, each with dark curtains to conceal our midnight doings.
One of the strange things is he's a blonde guy. Because in my head, I always think of Jeffrey Combs. And when I read that story the first time...
Well, it was funny because when Jeffrey came in to audition, in my mind, I was seeing a blonde, from Lovecraft's story. As a matter of fact, he keeps referring to him as that damn towhead, I think it's. Is a phrase that's used a lot in the stories. But Jeffrey had the personality of Herbert West. He was so clearly on the right wavelength, so the hair color became not so important.
It doesn't really matter. Yeah, of course.
But I always sort of got into the idea that Herbert West is almost like an Aryan. He's like a Hitler Youth or something. There's this kind of single-minded, fascistic approach that he takes to everything.
Well, they're out in the middle of nowhere with this place. He calls it their sinister haunt of science. And they're waiting around for the perfect body, following the death notices, and they get lucky when they hear of this workman who drowned the morning before. And he was too poor for a funeral, so he didn't get embalmed. They just put him right in the ground.
Yeah.
So they find the grave, they dig him up, and they bring him back to the house and inject them.
Yeah.
And here, inject him. And this is where the protagonist actually, at this point, says, all right, so Herbert thinks the human life is all mechanical. I still might think there's a soul or something.
Right.
So he's curious that when this guy gets reanimated, he wants to ask him, where have you been?
Yeah, for the whole day, what's happened?
Mm-hmm.
But this time the solution doesn't do anything. He lays there for 45 minutes. And there's no...
Yeah. And they go, well, let's remix it. Let's try and come up with something else. And while they're in the other room doing that, they hear a scream.
When from the pitch-black room we had left, there burst the most appalling and demoniac succession of cries that either of us had ever heard. Not more unutterable could have been the chaos of a hellish sound if the pit itself had opened to release the agony of the damned. For in one inconceivable cacophony was centered all the supernal terror and unnatural despair of animate nature. Human it could not have been. It is not in man to make such sounds. and without a thought of our late employment or its possible discovery, both West and I leapt to the nearest window like stricken animals, overturning tubes, lamp, and retorts, and vaulting madly into the starred abyss of the rural night.
They just run away.
They just run.
I
They
love
don't
it.
even check it out.
And this thing is still out there.
Yes.
You know, that's the thing.
Well, the barn catches fire.
Right.
Yeah. When this guy's in there, this reanimated corpse is, flailing about.
Yeah, they knock over the lamp on their way
Oh,
out.
they knock it over.
Yeah, they're the
Okay,
culprits.
okay.
And then they go spend the night at West's room on campus, like scared,
Right.
hugging each other. I don't know what they're doing.
And then they read the paper.
The house burned down.
That house burned, or the farmhouse burned down
Right.
that they were doing their experiments in. And then also the grave had claw marks on it, like somebody was trying to dig
Trying to
into
get
the
back.
grave, get back into the grave.
Yeah.
And for 17 years after that, West would look frequently over his shoulder and complain of fancied footsteps behind him. Now he has disappeared.
Yeah.
Never found the guy.
Yeah, that's a great thing in the story, that West is constantly looking over his shoulder. And he does it more and more often as he reanimates more and more people.
Right.
uh-huh.
Yeah.
It's a really good idea.
It is, and Lovecraft's very careful not to let you forget that.
My first idea was to do this as a series of little movies, to do actually for television. That was, we were thinking that these are going to be,
Wow.
since it was
Really?
written as a serial, that we were going to do half-hour episodes, and that each, so we wrote up this first story as an episode. And I think our original draft of it was set in period. We did it, sort of...
Oh,
Great.
wow.
Which I think, if you sort of work backwards, he's talking about 17 years, and this story was written in 1922,
Yeah.
that would mean that
Before the war.
this would be like 1905
Yeah.
or something
Right.
like that. So, that was where our story was set, and we were going to kind of follow, each episode would be kind of close to Lovecraft's. It would be like a 6-part miniseries, and we tried to sell it. Strangely enough, we had just done a thing for PBS, an adaptation of one of our plays, and so I went to them with this, thinking that maybe this could be a PBS miniseries.
Yeah. Ken Burns Reanimator.
or like mystery theater, like
Right.
that type of thing.
And that was not going to happen. So someone said, well, maybe half hours are hard to sell. Maybe we should make it an hour. And so we combined the first story and the second story together, and that's kind of how we proceeded. And eventually, when we couldn't sell the hour, they said, well, maybe this should be a feature.
A feature.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, we'll put the third story in. And this was Brian Usna, who is now involved, and he said, no, put all of them in, throw into everything.
Yeah.
The kitchen sink.
When we get into the second chapter,
Yes.
The plague demon.
some time has passed. West having given up his research for a while. Of course, that can't last.
Yeah. Well, he goes to Halsey again and said, like, look, my work is giving results. And Halsey's like, no, I'm not going to support this. You're out of your mind.
So that summer, after the protagonists and Herbert have graduated, the plague comes to Arkham.
Yeah.
And even though they're not licensed yet as physicians, they get pressed into service, along with Dr. Halsey, who really distinguishes himself and even impresses Herbert with his determination to help. I mean, the townspeople, they love Dr. Halsey. Because of the confusion, Wes is even able at one point to smuggle off a recently deceased corpse into the college laboratory and inject it.
The thing actually opened its eyes, but only stared at the ceiling with a look of soul-petrifying horror before collapsing into an inertness from which nothing could rouse it. West said it was not fresh enough. The hot summer air does not favor corpses.
Exactly as he said.
Yeah, it's not fresh enough.
The two continue to treat the plague victims, and they are almost dead from exhaustion, and unfortunately,
Dr. Halsey gets the plague.
that's right, and he dies.
And he dies.
And all the students are, of course, pretty upset. They all hang out together after Halsey's service, but most of them drift away.
Uh-huh.
Probably because they're creeped out by hanging out with West. And he convinces the protagonist, let's make a night of it.
Yeah, come on, it'll be good fun. In fact, when we sneak the body back to his dorm, the landlady sees him and she says, "Oh boy, they must have had quite a night, the three of them."
Yeah, because they
dragging
carry
his
him in
corpse.
between like it's like Weekend at Bernie's, something like that.
About 3 a.m., the whole house was aroused by cries coming from West's room, where, when they broke down the door, they found the two of us unconscious on the blood-stained carpet, beaten, scratched, and mauled, and with the broken remnants of West's bottles and instruments around us. Only an open window told what had become of our assailant, and many wondered how he himself had fared after the terrific leap from the second story to the lawn which he must have made.
Now, the thing that's interesting about this, and we kind of used it in our movie, is that everyone gives credit, I think, to 28 Days Later as having fast-moving zombies.
Oh yeah.
But this story has got...
It's got fast zombies.
It does.
Yeah.
These zombies are like breaking through walls, jumping out of windows.
Yeah.
These are...
They're feral and animal-like.
But it's also, I think, kind of like he's anticipating the idea of adrenaline, that they're sort of so charged up with whatever this chemical is that it's making them incredibly manic.
Kind of like a super vigor.
Yeah, and super strength.
And super strength.
And, the thing about Lovecraft is that, Lovecraft never thought of it, he never believed in the supernatural.
Yeah, no.
And he always has a scientific basis for everything in his stories. And it's true here. I think that knowing how well he researched things, that he probably did a lot of research about what chemicals would be used and so forth, and I think anticipated adrenaline.
Not only
pretty cool.
Are they fast-moving zombies, the zombies are cannibals, which is what we find out right now.
Right now in the story.
They tell the police that this is just some guy they got drunk with. They don't say it's Dr.
Yeah,
Halsey,
they don't
obviously.
say it's
Because they went and they got him.
They stole his body, yes.
And the police would probably look into this more, but they've got their hands full because a watchman at the Christchurch Cemetery has been clawed to death. Clawed to death. And the next night, 8 houses are broken into. 17 people are maimed by what witnesses say maybe some white, malformed ape. And now I say 17 people were maimed. 14 of these people actually were killed by the thing.
And then
3 of them were already dead from plague. He just nibbled on them a little.
Yeah, he ate them.
Yeah.
Like, that was the thing. He would go out and find these people and eat them. So this is kind of a precursor to cannibal zombies.
Yeah, I can't think of anything else in literature where there were cannibal zombies.
No, this is it.
It wasn't until like Romero in the 60s did Night of the Living Dead.
Right here.
Boom. Cannibal zombies.
And now, every weekend, there's a zombie movie at the Multiplex.
I know, if you're only around to collect the royalties.
Yeah.
Only.
Only. Well, the next night, a posse gets together, and when somebody reports scratching at their window, they get the thing, they shoot it, though not fatally, and they send it to the hospital where they
discover that it's Dr. Halsey.
Yeah,
it's Dr. Halsey.
They dressed its wound and carted it to the asylum at Sefton, where it beat its head against the walls of a padded cell for 16 years, until the recent mishap, when it escaped under circumstances that few like to mention. What had most disgusted the searchers of Arkham was the thing they noticed when the monster's face was cleaned. The mocking, unbelievable resemblance to the learned and self-sacrificing martyr who had been entombed but 3 days before. The late Dr. Alan Halsey, public benefactor and dean of the medical school of Miskatonic University. To the vanished Herbert West and to me, the disgust and horror were supreme. I shudder tonight as I think of it, shudder even more than I did that morning, when West muttered through his bandages, "Damn it, it wasn't quite fresh enough."
And that's the end of the second part.
Great punchline.
That's a good punchline, yeah.
And from there, we're on to the next chapter.
6 shots by midnight. It is uncommon to fire all 6 shots of a revolver with great suddenness when one would probably be sufficient. But many things in the life of Herbert West were uncommon.
Some more time has passed.
Yep.
And West and our writer have gotten jobs as physicians in Bolton, which is close to Arkham, and there's a mill there. They also get a house together out in the boonies where they can do the research. West is obviously still all for it, although he gets a little bothered by that first human specimen they let go, which he feels is hunting him as well.
Oh, right.
Lots of mill workers have accidents in Bolton, so they get some specimens right away.
We had not been settled a week before we got an accident victim on the very night of burial, and made it open its eyes with an amazingly rational expression before the solution failed. It had lost an arm. If it had been a perfect body, we might have succeeded better. Between then and the next January, we secured 3 more. 1 total failure, 1 case of marked muscular motion, and 1 rather shivery thing that rose of itself and uttered a sound.
But then there's no luck for a while until they hear about this boxing match.
Yep, it's one of those illegal street boxing matches because the puritanical nature of the area, boxing is illegal. So the guys kind of, take to the streets and they have these,
the mill workers will organize it for their entertainment.
It's a Tyler Durden kind of thing.
Yeah, it's Fight Club. So this is between a guy named Kid O'Brien and Buck Robinson, who's a black man known as the Harlem Smoke. Lovecraft has some pretty stupid things to say about both of them, actually. The descriptions of the black man are pretty awful.
Yeah, and the Irish,
the Irish
immigrants. Lovecraft was all about, his family had come over on the Mayflower.
Right.
Very pure, and, all these new immigrants he's kind of very disparaging of in all of his stories. The Irish, the Portuguese, the Italians.
Yeah, he says some equally offensive things about Italians in this same couple of paragraphs.
Yeah, it's... I mean, it's well known Lovecraft's fear of anybody that wasn't Anglo. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, it's in a lot of his stories, and this is no exception.
Yeah, this is the one story that we did not use in any of our.
Yeah. I mean, I love the idea of the boxing match and what happens here where, they call Herbert out because he's the doctor, and he says, I can get rid of this body for you discreetly. Because what happens in the boxing match is...
Yeah, he gets...
The black guy's killed.
Yeah, he's killed in the fight, and people freak out, and then, Herbert steps in and goes, hey, I'm a doctor.
Right.
Oh, no, he's dead. I can take care of this. And everybody's like, good, great,
good,
take care
here
of it.
you go. So they get the body to the lab, and they try everything, but no solution is going to reanimate this guy. And they give up. And they bury it in a shallow grave. Next night, West goes to treat an Italian woman who's hysterical because her kid is missing. Mm-hmm. In fact, she's so worked up that she dies.
She has a heart attack.
Yeah, and then her husband is after Dr. West because he didn't save her. Mm-hmm. This is bad because they're already stressed out. They're afraid of the police for having absconded with this body.
Yep.
And then that night, about 3 a.m., there's a steady rattling on the back door. And West comes up to the protagonist's room with a revolver. Because it could be this Italian guy.
Right, because this guy's been, harassing him because his wife died.
So we both went down the stairs on tiptoe, with a fear partly justified and partly that which comes only from the soul of the weird small hours. The rattling continued, growing somewhat louder. When we reached the door, I cautiously unbolted it and threw it open, and as the moon streamed revealingly down on the form silhouetted there, West did a peculiar thing. Despite the obvious danger of attracting notice and bringing down on our heads the dreaded police investigation, a thing which, after all, was mercifully averted by the relative isolation of our cottage, my friend suddenly, excitedly, and unnecessarily emptied all 6 chambers of his revolver into the nocturnal visitor. For that visitor was neither Italian nor policeman. Looming hideously against the spectral moon was a gigantic, misshapen thing not to be imagined save in nightmares. A glassy-eyed, ink-black apparition nearly on all fours, covered with bits of mold, leaves, and vines, foul with caked blood, and having between its glistening teeth a snow-white, terrible cylindrical object terminating in a tiny hand.
Yeah, so the boxer had a child's arm in his mouth.
Yeah, and he's running around on all fours.
Yeah, it's awful. It's pretty awful. It is kind of curious though that he does rap on the door. As if kind of bringing back some kind of treat.
Well, it's like your cat does.
Yeah. Brings you a dead mouse.
Yeah.
I love you.
Oh.
The horror is kind of dispelled too when he says it was neither Italian nor policeman. It's just a strange way to say it.
And that's the end.
That's the end of
the third
that
part.
chapter, thankfully.
And that concludes part 1 of our show on Herbert West Reanimator.
Wow, what a journey.
It has been a journey so far.
But I wonder what happens next.
Who knows? I think you'll have to tune in next week where we will complete our interview with Stuart Gordon and our coverage of the story.
Yep.
Once again, thank you to Andrew Lehman for providing his dulcet tones.
Amazing.
And folks, while you're waiting for the next show to come out, why don't you head on over to Tor.com and check out their excellent offerings.
Absolutely. And keep your eye out for the little Christmas poems that we're going to be throwing out. There will be a Christmas poem every day. And now I understand they're a little short, but they are sweet.
And that's all.
I'm Chris Lackey.
I'm Chad Pfeiffer.
And this has been the H.P. Lovecraft Literary Podcast.
hppodcraft.com.
hppodcraft.com